Quick, go around to the room then. Let's just introduce ourselves. First of all, the people online so that we can get you. So online folks, please introduce yourselves. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Yes, this is Peter Caldwell. I'm dialing in from the West Lafayette area, Purdue University. I'm an entrepreneur in residence there. And one of the things I have to do to help ensure that I'm getting up to speed on my startup is learn more about SBIR grant and budget management.
Very good. Next online.
I'm Michael Becklever. I'm at in Champaign, Urbana, University of Illinois, and I'm a co-founder, and we're in the middle of applying for an SBIR grant, and so this is incredibly timely information for us. We're looking at what we need to do.
Yeah, now is the time you need to be getting into it, so it is a timely call. That's why we schedule during these times. And the final online?
Hi, my name is Miriam. I'm a co-founder of the medical guidance system company. We started the ULI, so we are home for SBIR grants. So similar to others, we are looking for some information about budget.
All right, come to the right place. And then in the room here.
My name is Matt West. I'm a faculty of mechanical engineering department here at the U of I, and to get started with all of this kind of thing.
I'm Alan Singleton with Singleton Law Firm, with corporate and intellectual property law matters, and I'm also an entrepreneur in residence here at Enterprise Works.
Hi, my name is Paul. I'm just
I'm Kevin Smith, and I'm an entrepreneur working on automotive vision technology.
I'm Catherine Ingram. I think you guys have all heard from me or met me before. I'm the coordinator of student innovation and entrepreneurship programs at the Technology Entrepreneur Center here on campus.
My name is Ian Huntley. I'm an MBA student here at the university, and I am co-owner of a startup on campus called Exnus. We're creating safer sports mats.
I'm Laura Bly. I'm the Associate Director of the Research Part. Welcome to all of you who are here and to those of you on the line. Thanks for being here.
Okay, this is a workshop type format. You'll notice you got a checklist, a kind of presentation. This isn't an exhaustive checklist, but it's to serve as a reminder, and I use this format so that you can think about these things as you begin your proposal, as you go throughout the proposal development effort, and then before you submit the proposal, one last time, check through this among the other checklists that you have. So I hope you find the checklist useful. Interrupt me with questions, workshop type format. The most useful information is what applies to your case in particular, so ask me your specific questions as we go along. I will talk about the budget. I will talk a little bit about the technical plan. I'll talk a little bit about graphics and formatting. A little bit about the timeline. I won't talk about commercialization. I won't talk about letters of support. Those are covered in other sections. They're very important, so not to exclude them. But since they're covered in other sections, they aren't part of the presentation here. Probably one of the...
Sorry, before you get started, yes. For the folks who are online, if you have questions, you're welcome to take yourself off of mute to ask that question. But if you have questions and you don't want to do that or interrupt, you're welcome to put them in a chat. And I'll be monitoring the chat. So as those come in, I can certainly bring those up. So you're welcome to ask questions either way.
Yeah, very good. And I'll be monitoring you for a hand raise.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, most important thing with the budget, read the guidelines. And this is true of the whole proposal. Read the guidelines very carefully. The agencies are looking for reasons to reject your proposal. And if they find something that's not correct or true to format, they'll just reject it. And that makes it easier for them on their end. So don't give them any reasons to reject. Make sure that your total dollar amount fits within the budget cap. It's not a situation where you've got direct dollars and then you can put indirect rates on top of that, but everything has to fit within the total budget limit. You know, when you submit a budget, it doesn't have the level of review initially as it will later on. The proposal process, if you're selected for an award, then you get a notification about a month or two before about 3 or 4 months afterwards saying you've been selected for an award and you have to submit a bunch of information. So they come after you for more information. That's when you really have to be able to support your budget. So you want to build your budget for scrutiny later on, as well as for the initial presentation. I've got a chart of the budget guidelines here, the budget restrictions for SBIR for phase 1, for 6 different of the 11 agencies. I chose these 6 because they're the ones that we get most heavily funded here. But there are 5 others. They all have their budget restrictions as well. One of the other things you don't read in the guidelines is that the government really doesn't want you to lose money on this project. They realize that you're a startup company, you've got expenses, your research and development efforts cost money. They cost direct money in the money that you pay for staff and materials and supplies and travel. But it costs a certain amount of money to run the company in general. And there are different kinds of these indirect costs. 2 different kinds of indirect costs by and large. One of those are indirect costs that apply directly to staff. These would be tax match that are required by the government, a retirement account, health insurance if you help out with that, vacation time is considered a fringe benefit. So there's a fringe benefit category that costs more than your direct costs, and the government's willing to reimburse you for that. There are also general and administrative indirect costs, such as the time that it takes to run the company, rent, utilities. You can't assign these indirect costs to any one project in particular, because they go across several projects, but they still cost money, so the government is willing to reimburse you a certain amount for both of these kinds of indirect costs. There's no reason not to request these indirect costs. You might as well. The government understands that you are incurring these costs, and if you waive the indirect costs to try and be a nice guy, they'll think you're not very smart or savvy business-wise. So you send a message that you're not a good businessman if you just say, we will waive the indirect costs. Unless you have a reason to do so. You know, it might be that you've got several streams of income and you've got investment money already, and for this project you're willing to waive indirect costs, basically offset by some other sources. If that's the case, you must say so explicitly, or the government will realize you're not really realistic, you're not fully aware of what it takes to run a company. So don't lose money on the project. Don't structure a budget that will lose money. Don't structure a budget that will try to do more than you can really do. Don't structure a budget that's over-promising things. Realism is very important. In your budget, a lot of times you can't include equipment, so make sure that you read the guidelines and know whether equipment is allowed or not. Equipment is defined as anything $5,000 or more. So if you buy a $2,000 computer and $1,000 worth of software, you might think of that as equipment, but from the SBIR world, that's not equipment, that's materials and supplies. Don't put any commercialization or marketing expenses in your budget, unless it's one of those budgets that has a specific plan for that, and they're becoming more and more common. The NSF SBIR now has a $20,000 allocation for boot camp. So when you do your NSF proposal, if you want to go to boot camp, you can put that $20,000 in there. That's outside of research and development, but it's specifically allowed for. Department of Energy allows you $6,500 for commercialization assistance. NIH allows you $5,000 for commercialization assistance. The guidelines will tell you, and if there's a specific allocation for commercialization assistance, you can request that. Otherwise, you can't request any commercialization in your budget. And patent expenses can't be included in the budget. They have to come out of the profit. They have to come out of other sources of income. Jen mentioned before, and I'll reinforce, the SBIR approach is not sufficient to run a whole company. There are certain expenses that they will not reimburse, either directly or indirectly. Patent expenses is one of them. Marketing in general, advertising expenses is another. Certain expenses can't be reimbursed. So the SBIR effort won't cover the entirety of what it takes to run a business, but they will cover at least a lot more than your direct expenses. All right, so on the top of page 2, I've got a couple different examples of how indirect rates are broken out. A single tier rate and a multi-tier rate. The 2-tier rate.
Can you scroll on the screen just to keep up with the books online?
It looks like this.
Thank you.
The single tier rate is the simplest, and that's what NSF uses. And they say, okay, we'll take all of your indirect rates and lump them into one big pot, both the fringe benefit rates and the general administrative rates, and we'll apply them to labor only. So when you write your proposal, say, here's what our direct costs are, here's what our total staff costs are, and we'll take a certain percentage of that and apply that percentage to the staff costs and claim that as indirect rates. Other agencies, NIH and especially the Department of Defense, prefer a two-tier rate, in which case you take the staff explicit costs and apply them to staff, and then you take your general administrative costs and apply them to the staff fringe benefits, and to other direct costs. And I've got a breakout here showing a couple of indirect rates. Fee is not considered an indirect rate, but it is not a direct rate of proposal. It's something that has to be included in the budget amount. So in these two examples here, you can see that the total amount, if it's a $225,000 proposal, with some reasonable amounts for other direct charges, materials and supplies, the amount of staff that you get is in the $120,000 range. So just a little over half of your total project budget is in staff. The indirect costs eat pretty quickly into the project budget, and you have to take that into account. What percentage do you ask for? Well, if you've been around for a while, and if you've been working with the government, you'll have set up your books so that you can keep track of your actual indirect rates. And you can say in your proposal, here are our rates historically, so here's what we're proposing, and we can justify those rates. When you get selected for an award, you'll probably ask for that justification. You don't have to submit it with the proposal, but you have to be prepared for it. Most startups, though, like most everybody in this room, don't have a history of indirect rates, so you have to prepare some kind of amount. And NSF allows you to just claim 50% of direct labor costs as an indirect rate. That's their safe rate. NIH allows you to request 40% as their safe rate. USDA allows you to request only 10% as your safe rate. And so the USDA rate isn't going to really be enough to cover your costs. That's one case where USDA expects other sources of income. And you're going to lose money with indirect rates on the USDA proposal. They're not going to be enough to cover the cost. All right, any questions on the indirect rates, how to request that, how that looks like in a budget? And nothing from the field. All right, let's look at some specific budget amounts then. I won't go over all of these, but the important thing here is minimum time requirements. Each agency will be different as far as what they require for minimum time. NIH requires 10% time on the project. NSF requires 1 person month per year on the project. Different agencies will require different amounts. Read the guidelines and make sure you've got at least the minimum time for your personnel, at least for the key personnel, PI. Key personnel are people who submit substantially to the project, who really have an important contribution to the project. With a key person, you will submit their bio in the biograph section. You will write them up in your guidelines. And you can't have a to be determined in the key personnel section because that person is too important. You can have to be determined in the other staff sections, but not in the key personnel. Sometimes you will have staff working for free. Sometimes you'll have an owner of a company who's willing to kick in some time for free and not charge the government. Usually this is not a good idea because it tells the government you're losing money or you're not savvy or you're not willing to make money on this. But sometimes an owner is willing to do this, in which case in the budget you put the amount of time they're willing to spend and then $0. You can't claim they're spending no time. You still have to put an amount of time that you need to spend and claim no dollars. In a sub-award, by the way, the faculty member not working is very common. So quite often you'll see a faculty member who accepts an award mostly to fund his graduate students. And so 0 hours in a sub-award is not uncommon.
So you put 0 hours there or $0?
You put, did I say 0 hours? That was wrong. You put a number of hours. You have to show that they're willing to spend a certain amount of time. Thank you for the correction. Moving ahead to page 3. I won't go over most of these. I will, however, mention the difference between consultants and subawardees and vendors. A consultant is typically an individual who works directly on the project, and you negotiate or write an agreement with them as an individual, not as part of an institution. A subawardee is an institution that has an agreement and their institutional officials sign it, and they get treated a little bit differently in the budget. And a vendor is someone who provides standard services, a lab assay, or polishing services. Any kind of standard services that they've got a rate for, they can be a vendor, and they're not considered a subawardee or subcontractor. It's to your advantage to make people vendors where you have a choice rather than subcontractors, because the subcontractors have to supply a full budget of their subcontract expenses, just as detailed as your primary budget. It can be an advantage also for a consultant. If you've got a choice between a consultant and a subawardee, the consultant doesn't have to provide a full budget, but the subawardee does. All right, the only other thing I'll mention on this page is the fee. Again, no reason not to request this fee. It gets you no points if you lower the fee. Except for USDA, they actually say that if you they encourage you to lower the fee, but it's the only agency that encourages you to lower the fee. But by and large, it's not part of the evaluation metrics, so you might as well request the fee, because that's profit that when you get it, you can spend however you want. That can be spent for advertising, for legal expenses, for IP protection.
So for a campus, you would either have people coming on just as individual consultants, or you'd subcontract to the university like we normally do for an NSF grant. Is that?
Yeah. So if your company is working with a faculty member, then sometimes you have a choice whether that faculty member just works as a consultant outside of his or her university work, or whether it's a subcontract with the university and they're funded through the university mechanism. Consultants, by the way, sometimes are capped as far as what you can reimburse them in your proposal. NSF used to be $600 a day. It now is up to $1,000 a day. That's $125 an hour, which is pretty low rate for a lot of consultants. Sometimes they're not willing to do that. The USDA rate is $629 a day, which sounds like somebody thought about it a long time to come up with a figure like that.
Can you say something about the difference between somebody being a consultant versus being like a senior personnel or just an employee or whatever?
Yeah, the senior personnel is someone who works as an employee of the company. They're hired by the company issues them a W-2 form. The company has to do tax match. They are officially an employee of the company.
And then a consultant is there just for a specific project for a given amount of time,
Right.
rather than somebody who's there interpersonally.
And are there pros and cons of doing it? I guess it seems to me there are people who could be one or
Yeah, sometimes they can be one or the other.
Is there some sort of standard advice on one's easier or better, or?
There's less administrative overhead on a consultant. You just pay the money, you don't have tax matches, there are no tax reporting requirements.
The flip side being the cautious, if you're in a situation where you do have somebody showing up every day, you're working 8 to 5, using your computer and things of that nature, and you want to avoid having that person be a consultant because the IRS may disagree with you and ask for back.
Right. Fair labor laws require or have some stipulations about if this certain person is using your equipment on your premises under your direction, then they can't be considered legally a consultant.
It's coming up in the news a lot, like Google and Oracle and a lot of lawyers or Silicon Valley tech companies, where they're using a lot of consultants or contractors. Really, they're employees. They're treating them like employees, and they're making them work like that, but they're not giving them the benefit of actually being an employee. So, I mean, you you've probably heard of that, but I would read into some of those cases, because there
Yeah.
probably is a lot of argument that's been researched on both sides of that.
Yeah, if there's a question, check with Alan
Yeah, I was
or
gonna say.
some legal, yeah.
We've had whole events about this issue, so, in the
Yeah.
past.
All right, let's see. Budget justification, you have to write up a justification explaining your expenses. You don't have to reiterate numbers that are in the proposal itself, although it's often useful to do so. In the personnel section of your budget justification, it's wise to give the title of the person, to say what that person's role is on the project, what work they'll be doing. And for NSF proposals, it's also good to give the SOC, special occupation code number that you can get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. The SOC number is not required in the proposal itself, but if you're selected for an award and they come back and say you have to supply additional information, they will then request the SOC code for all of your employees. And they'll make it sound nasty. They'll say, you are terribly in default, you're gonna get crushed if you don't, or disqualified if you don't submit this number. So they make it sound like you should have submitted it, even though they never really asked for it. But knowing ahead, you might as well look it up and go ahead and ask for it. And go ahead and supply it in the budget justification. For fringe benefits, also for GNA, in the budget justification, you don't have to describe all the detailed calculations if you're doing something other than the safe rate. You have to describe the general method. Later on, they may ask for it if you're doing something other than the safe rate. If you're requesting a safe rate, you can just say, we are requesting the safe rate, and you don't have to explain anymore. Travel, most agencies require a breakdown of travel. Most agencies require you for every trip to say why you are taking the trip, where you're going to take it, how many people are going to be there, what the reason for the trip is, what you expect to pay for lodging costs, what you expect to pay for airfare. Most agencies require that. The one exception being at NSF, they require you to travel to a grantee workshop. And they just allow you to request $2,000 for each grantee workshop, each person who's attending. So you don't have to justify that, but other than that, you do have to break it down. Materials and supplies, don't just say general materials and supplies, but provide a list in the budget justification of the materials and supplies, numbers, quantities, prices. If they get to be in a few $1,000s range, it's good to supply a quote as well. You just supply a quote in the budget justification. If it's above $5,000, they'll almost certainly ask for a quote. And so if it's above $5,000, you always want to put a quote in the budget justification. All right, any questions on budget so far? All right, I've included a hypothetical budget. This is a USDA one, just an example USDA budget. So we'll take a couple minutes while you look over. One of the notable things about this budget, USDA cap is $100,000. This particular budget has a sub-award in it. The sub-award is just under a third, it's $28,000. But by the time you take out some reasonable equipment and materials and supplies in the sub-award, out of $100,000, you're left with only $28,000 to spend direct on staff. So the $100,000 USDA proposal can be eaten up pretty quickly by these other indirect costs and sub-awards. You don't have a lot of time to spend. Again, you have to be careful not to overpromise. So let's just take a few minutes to go ahead and absorb this budget, and then we'll see if there are any questions.
consultant is doing very well out of this.
What this budget doesn't say is how much time he's putting in.
My house,
Oh, wait a minute.
that's $600 an hour. They're doing great.
You know what? That should be days.
Okay, I agree, that's not quite so generous.
Yeah, that's the max for USDA is 629 per day. I need to change that. Yeah, that would be a generous rate. If you did a mind meld with Sherrick, how do you calculate the time value of a mind meld?
That's right.
Yeah, I have a question. So for, this is a USDA hypothetical budget.
Yeah.
Theirs was 8 months. Do all months have to be accounted for? Because I guess with their staffing and the month that they're listing for the staff, it doesn't total to 8 months.
The months and the days listed here are total across the whole project. The budget here doesn't say when during the project they'll spend that time. It's just total across the whole project. Is that what you were asking?
So my question is, do you have to account for all 8 months for instance, your senior key person and other personnel? Does that have to total 8 months for you to see that? For instance, you have 1.2, 0.5, 1, and 2.5. So that's what, 4 point? I don't know. Yeah, less than that, like 3.7.
All right.
Months.
So we'll
Out of
say
8 months.
All right, we'll say it's 8 months. Scotty's working for 1 month total during that whole 8 months. So if he was working on a straight line basis, he would work for 0.125 person months every month. But you don't have to specify that in the budget. You don't have to specify how much they're doing per month during the whole project. You just have to total the amount that they'll spend across the whole project. All right, no more questions on budgets. Let's go ahead and move to the registration section. You want to get started on registrations early. These can take a month. That's no exaggeration. You read that it can take a month, all the guidelines tell you it can take a month, and you go, oh man, in this electronic world, surely things are going faster than that. They're just covering the bus. They don't have to, it doesn't really take that long. But it really can take that long. You've got various registrations. You have to have an EIN. You have to have a corporate entity. So Alan, how long does it take to create a corporate entity in a comfortable time frame where you're not rushing?
If you have one owner, probably 3 days. If you have multiple owners, I would allow at least a week to a week and a half, just because there's typically some coordination and communication that has to occur. 2 weeks would be better.
All right, so there's half of your month already used up in just creating a corporation.
But we can work quicker.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Yeah, I'm talking about proceeding at a non-sweaty pace. Because you'll be sweating enough about other stuff. You want to reduce the sweat where you can. You need a DUNS number from Dun & Bradstreet. The DUNS number is free. You just register on their website and you'll get the number after a few days. At least technically it's free. The real cost to you is that you will constantly be hounded by them to sign up for services that you don't really need. You know, when you sign up, don't you want to buy the $200 package? Don't you want to buy the $400 package? And every time somebody looks at your number, you'll get emails from them. Somebody just looked at your number and you might look bad unless you pay us $400. Don't pay those. You don't need to pay those numbers. Incidentally, the SBA just re-awarded the contract for numbering from Dun & Bradstreet to Ernst & Young. And so sometime this year, we'll probably see that change, and what that looks like and what the numbering scheme is like and how Ernst & Young handles it, yet to be seen, because this is recent information, but it's going to be an Ernst & Young number rather than a DUNS number later on this year. You also have to register with the SAM.gov database, used to be CCR, Central Contractor Registry. SAM takes a couple hours to register because you have to go through lots of certifications and representations. You've got to click, yes, we'll abide by this rule, yes, we'll abide by this rule, yes, we're aware of this rule, no, we aren't a foreign entity. Just, it takes a couple hours to enter all of that information. You have to give a government point of contact, electronic business point of contact, alternate electronic business point of contact. You have all these different points of contact that you can enter. You enter all your banking information. So that's a couple hours of just entry alone. And that's once you get in. To access it, you also have to establish an account in now a separate database, the login.gov database. So you get your login.gov account, which lets you into the SAM account. And then you wait for a week or so while it goes through the machinations and gives you your activation. You have to log into grants.gov and create an account in grants.gov. Grants.gov will ask you for your SAM registration, will ask you for your DUNS number. So you have to get those taken care of before you do the grants.gov. And then you have to register for an agency website. If you're doing an NSF proposal, you've got to begin research.gov, which is now the portal that gets you to Fastlane. If you're doing an NIH proposal, you do ERA Commons, which is their portal to get you to their interface, which is Assist. If you do NASA, you have to log into their electronic handbook. And when you try to log into the NASA electronic handbook, you get an email saying you need to submit a whole bunch of other documentation to verify your identification. The NASA EHB registration process with all the ID stuff takes a couple of weeks. I've been through plenty of times. That takes a couple of weeks. So if you're forming a company, a couple of weeks, SAM.gov a week, EHB handbook, you're already outside of a month, even for those. For NSF, and at least for NSF, the subcontractors also have to be registered in FASTS. So your subcontractors also have to go through all these procedures. And I give a link to that registration. Oh yeah, there's the SBA registration, which is a whole separate site you have to register for. That's where the SBA keeps track of your history in terms of SBIR awards and commercialization success. And so you have to register for that website. When you register for that website, you will get a control number. Some proposals or some interfaces will ask for the control number. Some will ask for a one-page PDF file. When you register with SBA, you can get a one-page PDF file, and sometimes you have to upload that, depending on how that particular interface is working in that particular year. Yeah,
On the change to the Ernst & Young number, are folks with the old numbers going to be able to continue to use those, or are they?
No idea. Yeah, good question. Lots of questions like that. All right, let's move on ahead then to technical aims in the work plan. Because this is an area that I often wrestle with when I'm working with clients. The whole idea of SBIR Phase 1 is feasibility. You have to take key components of the technology that are the highest risk areas, the ones that are likeliest not to work, and identify them. And then in Phase 1, you're going to prove that those key areas work, or not. If not, great, you've spent the money, you've learned, you don't go ahead to Phase 2. This is the nature of research and development. But that means with Phase 1 then, you have to establish technical goals that are very clear, very precise, and goals that you can turn around and say, here's how we met the goal. Those goals have to be measurable. They have to say, we will do, our technology will do this under these conditions to certain specifications, certain characteristics. What I often deal with is, we're going to build a great application that's going to do wonderful things. And it's often not clear what's in Phase 1 for feasibility and what would be future for Phase 2. So you need to keep the Phase 1 goals specific to Phase 1. It's good in your proposal to outline what's coming up in Phase 2. But for Phase 1, you have to say specifically what those Phase 1 goals are. Good mnemonic to remember, SMART. specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This is a standard mnemonic in the industry. You see SMART all the time, and it's a good one. You have to say exactly what your technology will do. You have to show how you're going to measure it. It's got to be realistic, feasible, something you actually can handle, and it has to deal with the technology at hand, and you have to do it by the end of the budget period. Show innovation and technical risk in your goals and work plan. Attempting to do too much is a common problem, so make sure it's realistic, make sure it's something you can do. Some buzzwords to watch out for because they're too vague. If you say you're going to investigate something or characterize something, or you'll do a literature review, or you'll study something, these are not clear measurable goals. In fact, they're not even R&D goals, they're basic research goals. This wording will fly in an NIH R01 grant, but it won't fly in an SBIR grant where you have to say specifically what the technology will accomplish. And in your handout here, I've got some example of weak and stronger objectives for you to look at. You can see all the weaker ones are very vague. They just talk about the general nature of the work that you're doing with no outcomes, no results, no specific measurable objectives. The stronger objectives at the bottom are very clear. We will do this, the technology will do this, it will perform to certain metrics, to certain characterizations. And it's your job as the proposal writer to come up with those metrics. It's your job as proposal writer to tell the reviewer what he or she needs to look for, what the technology will do, because it's new technology. Standard benchmarks often don't exist in the industry. You have to say, you have to come up with what your technology will do and how it's relevant. The work plan itself, here's where you can get very detailed. Here's where you can talk step by step how you will accomplish these goals. It's good to establish tasks that are numbered. That's helpful for the reviewer. It is good to have each task related to a specific objective where you can do that. It's good to cite existing literature. It's good to cite what other work has been done and how you will incorporate the other work that's been done. It's good to say who will do which work. You will want to have a Gantt chart with a timeline in your work plan showing when the different tasks will occur. You can be very, very detailed. And in this section, you can put detailed graphics. You can put dense graphics with lots of lines in them if they're relevant to the technology. This section will be read mostly by technical people. The commercial reviewers will scan this section. They'll kind of look over and they'll say, oh yeah, this looks like technology, this looks like science, it looks pretty good. They won't really try to understand it in depth. But NSF, NIH, NASA, all these agencies will get national leaders in these fields to review the technology proposal. And they will find problems with it. They will find flaws in it. The research plan has to be sound. If you're using statistical analyses, you have to say what statistical analyses you're going to do and how those will work. So this can be very detailed. It's also very good to put mitigation and risk reduction techniques in. Here's plan A, but we realize it's risky. If plan A doesn't work out, here's what we'll do for plan B. If plan B doesn't work out, here's what we might do. Alternative approaches, mitigations, those are good to include. The technical section is really good to show to another technical person who hasn't read the proposal when you get toward the end of the proposal. When you're a couple weeks out, you show it to someone who hasn't seen it before, someone who's very technical, and they will help you shake out the technical section. Those are the main points from the technical work plan. Questions in this area? All right. Formatting and graphics. You have a page limit. Everything has to fit within the page limit. You also have a font limit. You can only have font, you can't reduce the font beyond what it says unless it's in a graph or a table. So within those constraints, you've got to get a lot of information. And there are a lot of squeezing techniques you can do to squeeze information into that page link. I won't talk about the squeezing techniques themselves. So to say, if you're using squeezing techniques a lot, if you're trying to make graphs really dense and heavily populated, you're probably trying to put too much in the proposal. Remember, your proposal reviewers are reading a ream's worth of proposals. They're scanning. They're looking for at-a-glance comprehension. They're looking, what's the big picture here? Why is this exciting? Why is this important to me? They're also looking for reasons to reject this proposal. They'll look through quickly. They'll say, oh, this doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. They'll try and look to the next level. I still don't get it. And if I don't get it that quickly, no one else is going to get it. And then they'll start scanning for reasons to review. And when you read the reviewer comments, you can see the ones that are mostly just looking for reasons to reject it, and they're giving you some meaningful feedback. And you can see the ones where they really kind of like the idea, and even though they have some concerns, those are couched in, well, this is a good idea, but we're worried about this or that. You can read that. You want to be in the group that they're reading to support your proposal and not reading to reject it. And you accomplish that by letting them see the big picture up front early on, by communicating why the whole idea is important, by communicating why somebody would have to have it, what problem is it solving. So that at-a-glance scanning is very important. You want to do top-down. Present your conclusion up front. Unlike an academic paper where you tend to present a lot of information and then at the end there's this inexorable conclusion, yes, as a result of all the information we presented, here's the conclusion that you just can't deny. Well, leaving that to the end is not going to work in an SBIR proposal. The conclusion goes up front, and then you support that conclusion with points throughout the proposal. Top-down approach. If you pick up any magazine, you'll see on any page instantly what the big idea is. And you'll be able to pick out, you can move around on the page, or I can move around and pick out the information that's most important to you. So you can borrow some of those techniques in a proposal. And you can put those techniques in a proposal. You can have call-outs with quotes from people in a little box by the side. Numbering, bullet lists, underlining important points. Don't put important points buried in the text of the paragraph. It's an important point. Bring it up to a header or something. Make it stand out more. If you have to bury an important point in the text of a paragraph, bold it, underline it, make it stand out so that somebody could just quickly read through. Oh, I get it. This is important. I want to read more. I want to learn more. One common technique is to summarize information from several paragraphs into a subheading. The headings have to be exactly as prescribed in the guidelines. The guidelines say background and significance. Your heading has to say background and significance. The guidelines calls for work plan. Your heading has to say work plan. But beneath the main headings, you can put whatever subheadings you want. And so as an example, here I've got some subheadings. A weak subheading would just be summary. That tells the reader that this is a summary. But it doesn't tell them anything about what's in the summary. They would have to read in depth to find that out. Or background. That says, okay, this is a background section, but it doesn't really say what's in the background section. You can bring those to the fore, like I've got here. Proposed technology can reduce infant deaths by 6%. That's content, that's a summary. And if you were just scanning, you'd say, well, this is important, I better read more. 116 billion a year in US crop loss due to heat stress. That's an eye catcher, it's an attention grabber, it tells you what the big picture is. So bring that information to the fore as much as you can. Graphics, the ratio applies. If it's not worth 1,000 words, it's a questionable graphic. Make sure that the graphic really supports the at-a-glance comprehension. And here I'm talking about graphics in the early section, the commercialization section. The technical section, you can have detailed graphics. Early on, you don't want a graphic that causes someone to say, what is this? You want a graphic that instantly communicates what the technology is all about. You want a graphic that instantly communicates what the user experience is like. You want a graphic that instantly communicates the whole value to society for this proposal. And something that communicates the nature of the technological innovation. What are you introducing into the world that doesn't exist now? And it is non-trivial to produce such a graphic, especially to produce a simple one. So a simple graphic that communicates all this up front can take a long time. So you want to get started on that early on. Don't have any of these blobby graphics in your commercialization section. Don't have any chemical formulas in your commercialization section. That communicates nothing about the value of the product. It has to show the value proposition. All right, any questions on that kind of graphic overview? All right, I'm giving you a timeline. Oh, yeah, Kevin.
When you're including statistics, is there a number that you should use as like a baseline? Like, don't go below this number because it will be considered insignificant.
There is none because it's field specific. What might be meaningful in one field could be insignificant in another. So again, that's your job as the proposer to inform the reviewer what's important in the field. Yeah, and what? All right, this proposal development timeline here, you can go through it. I'll just mention a couple of items. The first thing I have is to review the program and the guidelines, make sure you're familiar with that. Quite often there are two sets of guidelines. You'll have the funding opportunity announcement or request for proposals or notification of funding opportunities, it's called different things, but the general solicitation. And then quite often you'll have a second document that details how you apply for an SBIR proposal. So make sure you read both documents because it's the detailed SBIR guidelines that will tell you the font requirements, the page requirements, and will give you more information about each section of the proposal. I like to draft early on just a high-level informal statement about why this is fundable, why it's exciting, why the institution will want to give you money for it. Half a dozen points. I call it a case statement, just informally. And then most of your proposal effort is in finding information and developing relationships and ways to support the information that you're stating is the main case. Usually the main case will fall out pretty neatly into the various sections of the proposal. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's nice to not have to worry about the guidelines and just think, here are the main reasons this is going to be funded. You want to contact the program office early on, get their feedback, no reason not to do that. You want to identify partners up front. They usually take the longest time if you're getting a letter from a partner. If you've got a sub-awardee, that sub-awardee will have to run the whole letter of commitment through the bureaucracy. A letter of support from a large corporation will have to be run through bureaucracy. That can slow you down. So you want to develop those relationships early on, get them going. Registrations, I have at least 6 weeks ahead of time. Initial draft of the proposal, a good month out. A good month out, you should have pretty much the bulk of the content in hand. Some holes here and there, some sections to fill in, and you can be starting to show it to your colleagues to get some informal feedback. Complete draft 2 weeks ahead of time. 2 weeks ahead of submission, you should be pretty much complete with it. That will allow you time to confidently and again without sweating, look through all the sections of the proposal, look through the guidelines, double check with all the checklists, show the proposal to someone who hasn't read it yet, and see does this make sense, and be able to incorporate comment. The really great proposals are separated from the fairly good proposals largely by the amount of debate that happens toward the end of the proposal effort. The ones that I've worked with that are really solid, they've got 2 or 3 experts working on them, arguing about what goes into it and what doesn't. The ones that are weaker, it's one guy, on a weekend he's putting down his main thoughts. And he writes those up and okay, I'm convinced, and submits it. And so that's really one of the key differentiators between the really good proposals. They've got a lot of maturity built into the end point. There's a lot of review that happens, a lot of debate. And they're very solid, and those are much better positioned to withstand criticism from the reviewers. Once you submit, you wait for 3 months, often more than that. Often you get an award, often you get a rejection. A rejection doesn't mean it's no good. Depending on the way the rejection is worded, you can always get the debrief and get the information. And you can read whether they're encouraging, whether they like the idea and have some concerns, or whether they pretty much just don't like the idea. And if they pretty much just don't like the idea, it's probably not worth resubmitting that one. Submit something else. And then you reapply after that. Also, regarding the timeline, I might mention, back to beforehand where you're contacting people, contacting the program officer, contacting your colleagues, that's a good time to contact me or another SBIR helper, one of the technical assistants. If it's a rough sketch idea, if you're just getting going, if you've got a few things, that's a great time to talk to us and talk, are we on the right path, are we on the wrong path, do you have any ideas here and there? Rather than waiting to the end and you've written a whole document, and then I come and say, no, this is really off the mark. And you spent a week writing something that's a little bit off the mark, and then you have to redo it. So use us early on. It's a good way to use all the help that you have. All right, anything else in general about the timeline? All right, on the last page I've included, just for your reference, a schedule of SBIR due dates. I won't talk about that, but there's a schedule there just for your information. And you can request my assistance by going to the Research Park SBIR Technical Assistance website and filling out the form. Answer any other questions? All right, very good.
Online, do we have any questions from online? We have one more person joining.
Really done, so here last time, the electronic copies of these handouts available?
Oh, yes, they will be. You will get, since you signed up, you'll get a questionnaire with some survey questions, and once you complete the questionnaire, it goes really fast, then you get a link to the electronic version. Thank you for reminding to mention that.
Great.
All right, yeah.
I'm just curious, for other people that maybe weren't at this workshop, if this could be useful, should they contact you if they want this, or?
They can contact me, they can contact Catherine.
So we do run this